InFi, episode 42.
Welcome to InFi, the future of finance, hosted by American economist and author Dr. Robert Murphy. Each week, tune in for dynamic discussions with business pioneers about emerging trends in finance, life insurance, asset management, technology, and more. Now, let's talk the future of finance.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the InFi podcast. Today I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Matthew DiPaola, who is Clinical Associate Professor of Orthopaedics and Sports Medicine at the University of Buffalo, Jacobs School of Medicine. More important perhaps, or more relevant for this discussion, is that Matt and I went to the same high school. So we grew up in Rochester, New York, and then he subsequently moved to Buffalo. You need to know that as part of the background because we talk about the Buffalo Bills. We worked that into the conversation in a very appropriate way. And this is a very fun conversation. Of course, Matt and I know each other, so it's very relaxed, but we do get into some serious topics, covering a host of things, ranging from 3D printing in modern medicine, what the future looks like there, and also just some of the economics of healthcare in the United States and whether the upcoming generation of doctors is up to the task. And so we cover these topics and more, and again, some Buffalo Bills lore. Without further ado, here's my discussion with Matt DiPaola. Matt, welcome to the InFi podcast.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
So I think the most important thing to talk about is the Buffalo Bills. I would have already explained in the intro. So tell us about, obviously we'll get into the fun stuff, the serious stuff, but the fun stuff first. What is the campaign you recently did involving Josh Allen?
This is funny. So we just finished up something we called National Shoulder and Elbow Week. So I'm an orthopedic surgeon, work in Buffalo, work at the University of Buffalo. Been here now 8 years. And about a little over a year ago, February in 23, part of an organization called the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons. So it's a relatively small but pretty prestigious organization that is, the main mission is research and education involving shoulder and elbow care, shoulder and elbow research. So specifically, my specialty within orthopedics is shoulder and elbow care. So that's what I do. I did an extra year of fellowship training just to specialize in shoulders and elbows. It's something I love, have a passion for. And a year ago, this organization started a fundraising campaign a couple years ago, about 3 years ago. And what it is, it's called National Shoulder Elbow Week, where they have 8 host cities per year that host an event. So you put on an event, and the event is just meant to raise awareness and funding and eventually bring in the money for shoulder and elbow research. So the Josh Allen thing was kind of funny. It was totally random. In the beginning, I honestly had no idea what I was doing putting this event together. I joked with people. I just felt this calling to do it because I felt like we've got some things here that people don't maybe know about that are gems in terms of education and research. And I said, I'm proud of what we do. There's a beautiful new medical school building that was built just before I got here. And when I came here, one of the things that I saw was this laboratory. We call it the simulation laboratory, but it's really arthroscopy, cadaver work. But it's basically a big laboratory to teach the up-and-coming generation of surgeons and medical students. So when I saw this, I thought to myself, wow, this is what I wish I had when I was at that level of training. And so I joined on and made it part of my mission to teach in the lab. And so I've been doing it very regularly since I got here. So it was one of the things that I really wanted to highlight and show what we were doing. That was sort of my impetus. But then it became this year-long thing where I agreed to be the chairman of the committee to host this event. I had to bring in other people to help me do it. Some of my partners, some people from Rochester and Syracuse. The idea is to get industry involved. So people who are involved with medical sales, to get, physical therapists involved, to get other doctors who aren't orthopedic surgeons, and then patients, and to bring people together, get everybody together in the course of raising money. So through this whole thing, I was joking with people that I'm like surgeon by day, wedding planner by night. And I learned a ton. I had to do source an event site and catering and you name it. And then all the fundraising, which to be honest with you, I had a good time doing, because I think like you, I like to talk a little bit and schmooze people and stuff. And it became a great way to meet people. So there was a guy, one of our salesmen introduced me to a guy named Rory Allen, coincidentally enough. And Rory runs a place called Zoom Copy right downtown. It's about, I don't know, 5 minutes from one of the hospitals where I work, Buffalo General Hospital. And Rory said that he heard we were having an auction, and Rory said, "Oh, hey, I want to donate one of these Josh Allen cutout things." And at that point, I was like, "Yeah, bring it on. We'll take anything. We're going to auction everything here, raise money." And so he gave us this 8-foot tall, like cartoon character Josh Allen cutout, and I had no idea it would kind of morph into what it did. So as I'm driving home, the wheels started turning. And I started thinking like, oh, this could be good. This is more than just an auction item. We could have some fun with this. So it sounds like you picked up on some of the things we did, where just every couple days I was coming up with like a new skit idea with Cutout Josh, to the point of, Cutout Josh got loaned. So we got him an offensive lineman to be his buddy. And, we just took it from there. And eventually we ended up auctioning off Cutout Josh, but it created a lot of buzz, because I would get people around town going, "Hey, is real Josh going to be there?" I was like, I don't know. He might be coming. We'll see. So, suffice it to say, we did not get real Josh to come, but we did get a couple of good celebrities to come. We got Lindy Ruff, who is the new Sabres coach, and baby Joe Macy, who I didn't know Joe Macy at the time, but Joe apparently was a heavyweight contender, undefeated heavyweight contender. Unfortunately, he got medically retired from boxing, but he was a big, big deal. I think early 2000s, and just a wonderful guy, wonderful ambassador for Buffalo. But Joe's now a medical device salesperson, so he was wonderful to have at the event. And so anyway, it was a lot of fun. It was a great success, and what was wonderful was we beat every other city in the country in fundraising, including cities like West Palm Beach and Phoenix and Denver. And so yeah, it was a bit of a feather in our cap. It was a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, that's great. So I don't know if you've ever thought this through, Matt, but I have many times, and especially once I realized what the punchline was, I've used this line many times when I meet people, and if they know me from, my political economic views, and I will say to them, in every year that I was in high school, my team, the Buffalo Bills, lost the Super Bowl.
Yes.
And I think that experience is what made me become a libertarian.
That's fun. That makes a lot of sense. I like that. Yeah, that's good.
So I'm wondering, have you ever reflected on that as far as your worldview and the fact that and I remember, because kids would taunt us, and I would say to them, well, they say, why do you guys keep, the Bills should stop going to the Super Bowl. They keep losing. And I say, well, then someone should beat them in the playoffs. Okay.
That's a good point. Yeah. I don't know that I ever related that to libertarianism, but it makes a ton of sense, in the sense that, when the libertarians run, they usually know they're not going to win, but what I find is there's such...
But they should win. That's the thing. Same thing with the Bill. They should have won, at least some of those years.
Maybe you can comment more on this. They sometimes, though, seem to eat each other alive. And I don't know if that's... I think you've touched on this a little bit, and you're great at sort of poking fun at all of these things and not taking yourself too seriously. But sometimes, forgive me for saying that, if there's anybody...
Yeah, no. It's, for sure libertarians. With the Bills, I don't know as much about why they just kept having those issues, but okay. Yeah. All right. So can you just speak a little bit to, you kind of alluded to it there when you were answering the Bills question or in the fundraising and whatnot, but so you do both, you do surgeries on patients, but also you teach, is that correct?
Yeah. So technically I'm clinical associate professor at the medical school here at the University of Buffalo, but I also am, I have a full-time practice. I teach medical students, teach residents. So residents are, think of it as like the apprentice, a surgeon apprentice is basically what a residency is. So you would do college, medical school, and then after medical school, you have what's called a residency. So residency would be your apprenticeship. And at that stage, you're kind of specializing into what field you'd want to do, for the rest of your life. And residency can be anywhere between, 3 years if you're doing... You can do what's called internal medicine for 3 years, or it may be much longer. I mean, orthopedics is 5, but I did an extra year of just specialization. So, call it the apprenticeship. And then after that, I have a clinical practice, which I've been in practice now almost 15 years. I was in Ohio for a while. We lived in the Cincinnati, kind of northern Cincinnati area, but I worked in Dayton. And my wife was finishing some training out there. She's a physician also. And that opportunity came up here for both of us that worked out really well because we grew up an hour away in Rochester there. And so it's nice because I have family there. But the opportunity was great here. It was something that allowed me to kind of bring all the facets together in what I do. So I don't just do surgery. I like all the aspects. I mean, like you, I think, you like to teach, you like to, I know you write books and get to connect with people online also, but I love doing it. I also do research. So currently I have a research grant. It's a $50,000 research grant that we're working on some, trying to improve treatments for infections after shoulder replacement surgery. So we're kind of leading the way with some certain segment of this type of research. So yeah, it allows me to have my hands in a lot of different pots, so to speak. And really, I feel like keeps things interesting. It's not just, and there's nothing wrong with just doing surgery. I mean, surgery is wonderful. I love it. And this morning I just had a few cases and we were actually going back and forth. We didn't know if we were going to be able to make it today for the podcast, but one got canceled. So anyway, I like it all. And I really like doing the technical and then passing that knowledge on. It sort of makes you part of something greater than yourself. You know that if you help train the next generation, someday we're all going to be patients. Someday we may need this type of stuff. So, but yeah, that's what I do.
Okay. Can you just explain? Because I think this, a lot of people may have never thought this out before. So at what point you knew you wanted to become a doctor at some point, and then did you know you wanted to also teach? And in general, your colleagues at the university who are, clinical professor, did they all know they want to do, or is it kind of thing that you're, or you wanted to become a professor and then you might do some stuff on the side, just sort of the practical. Anyway, can you just speak a little bit to that?
Well, I think, for me, it started way back when I think I knew I wanted to do surgery. So that's what drew me to medicine to begin with. I think people tend to go one direction or the other. Either it's surgical or non-surgical. You've got to sort of have, number one, a little bit of an aptitude for it. Number two, a desire to want to work with your hands and enjoy that technical aspect. And for me, I knew I would like that part. So I was already kind of leaning that direction. Then it was a matter of, which specialty? And orthopedics appealed to me because it was, you help people restore function and help people with pain. And I wasn't so much into the life or death type stuff, but I really felt a draw to helping people with pain and function. And I just, every day, I really do enjoy that aspect. And it's great in a lot of different ways because you can develop long-term relationships with people as well as do something very concrete and tangible. I think the idea, what you're asking is, how did you know you want to teach too and go into academics? It was funny. I really knew nothing about it. I mean, I didn't have any doctors in the family. And I remember I had a mentor or two early on that said, there's academic medicine and then there's private practice medicine. I was like, I don't know what the difference was. I had no clue. So as time went on, I mean, you're immersed in it enough through 4 years of medical school and, 5 years of residency that you get an idea of okay, academic medicine means some amount of teaching and or research. And as I went on, I kind of liked it all. So to me, we have an element where our practice is run. It's a university practice, but to a degree, we have a certain amount of control over it. I mean, we pay a certain, they call it our dean's tax, or a certain percentage to the university of what we bring in clinically. But then that goes it goes back to help our research department and fund other aspects that are more academic. And I also just love teaching. I mean, my dad was a teacher, and
yeah, I was going to ask you if you thought that had anything.
I don't think it was ever anything that was just explicit where I said, oh, my dad is a good teacher and I would like to teach. I think it's probably something maybe you're drawn to. I mean, maybe you guys, I don't know, we never had this exact conversation, but we always had conversations around the dinner table. I mean, you probably did too. And it's just something that if you see it in motion, or maybe you feel a gratitude to teachers that you had, and if you enjoy talking and speaking in front of people and passing on your knowledge, that kind of comes naturally. So to me, it was a good fit. I realized in time, because there's part of being a resident where you're, the apprentice, you're a senior resident, and then there's junior residents. You might be 4 years ahead of somebody else. You are tasked with actually teaching. It's just part of the job. And if you feel like, hey, this is something I like to do, I would miss it if I didn't, then it just draws you towards that. So as I've been in practice, I've not only practiced full time, each of my positions, whether it was in Ohio or here, there's been a teaching component. And then here especially, we've made some really good progress with the research, which has been a lot of fun because I also am afforded the opportunity to mentor medical students. So right now I have a few projects going on with medical students who are doing summer research projects, and they're able to kind of come in, help me in the laboratory while I'm operating. They're able to do some of the technical work, and then we get to come reconvene and figure out how things are working. So,
no, I know at least in economics, and I don't know, I guess probably like in math as well, but you tell me if it's true in medicine, that there was a phenomenon where there would be some professors, especially like the bigger schools, that were world famous, Nobel contenders, but they were horrible teachers. Like they were awful. Like I even heard them once in the elevator. Two of them were like, you got to teach this semester. The guy was like, oh yeah. I'm like, guys, I'm right here. I'm like, as a student, like at least hide it. And so, is there that phenomenon in medicine as well?
Well, so probably to some degree, although at least with surgery, in order to be a good surgeon, I mean, you've got to know what you're doing because people could die. So like if you're a bad teacher, then people don't die. You just might not convey the information very well. So what I'm teaching is a practical skill. It's probably a little like a master carpenter or something.
That's what I was going to ask you, like at a machine shop or something.
Yeah, like a master carpenter. Now, there's probably a certain segment of them that maybe, oh, hey, he's not the greatest. Like there are people who are surgeons who, hey, this guy does, 600 knee replacements a year or something like that. He knows his stuff. He may not be the best teacher though, but usually you're not working with just one person. A residency, you're rotating around with many, many people. There's probably some element, but yeah, it's hard to be good at everything. I feel lucky in the sense that I have a great group of partners. I mean, it's grown a lot over the past couple of years, so I don't know the exact number anymore. We've got somewhere between 35 to 40 partners. I don't mind if it's something that I feel like one of my partners does better. I don't mind saying, hey, I want you to go see Dr. So-and-so because they're really good at that. I'll help you with this, but they're really good at that. And as long as you don't get your ego tied up in it too much, then it allows you to you can be specialized and be good in a niche area. So you can not only be good technically, but then also be pretty good at teaching too if you just work at it, So yeah, but no, I get what you're saying because I had the same phenomenon in college. There were some teachers where you were getting taught by the teaching assistants and you're like, this is for self-starters. So it's a good thing I knew how to teach myself. But some were just forget about it, So
okay, let me tell you a quick anecdote and I want to get your reaction. And you'll see the relevance to the discussion. All right. So there was a period where I really got into the Affordable Care Act, and I actually co-wrote a book with an ER doctor actually on some of the economics of it and so forth. And there was a period where, right after it passed, where I was going around to, sympathetic groups or sometimes colleges giving, my spiel on it. And I went to this one, so it was a student, I don't know if they were libertarian or what they were, but it was like some student group that invited me to come into their campus and give a talk. So the crowd was, let's say, 40 undergrads. So that's an important part of the story. They were undergrad students sitting there watching my talk, and I'm going through my PowerPoints to do it. And there was one timer guy in the back that he wasn't hostile, but he was challenging me, at certain points. And his objections were legitimate. Like I would say something, then he would challenge it. And I would, it's kind of thing where yes, sir, that's a good point. But if you waited two slides later, I'm going to come to that, and you'll see my, that kind of deal where, it was perfectly reasonable what he said, even though I didn't think I was wrong on what I was saying, that kind of deal. So then later he comes, after the talk, the student host comes and thanks me and whatever. Okay. And then this guy comes up, and it turns out he is I think he was a cardiologist, and again, like professor of practice or whatever, whatever the terminology at the school. And since he saw the posters up, like, oh, economist Robert Murphy comes in to give a talk on Obamacare, he went just to see what's this all about.
Yeah.
And so, and he politically, he was, kind of on board with me, but I was more radical than him, that was the deal. And we're talking, he was, I want to say in his late 60s.
Yeah.
And so we're shooting the breeze, and this happened, I don't know, 8 years ago, let's say. And then at some point, I was asking him about so what do you think, because at the time, we were, many economists, we were concerned about the effects of the Affordable Care Act and blah, blah, blah. And then I asked him, what do you think about the state of medicine? And he said, well, I would not get any elective procedure from any doctor who's younger than 45. And I said, why? And then he looked and pointed at the group of students that had just watched me give my talk. And he said, would you want any of them cutting you? And I went, no. So
we're only students at the moment. There's a big difference between right then and
so that's why. So at the time, I thought that was hilarious when he said that, and I've been telling that story. But now you're here, you've got your actual students that you're going to unleash to the world with their scalpels. So I'm giving you a chance. Can you tell us, was that an unfair thing for him to say, or do you get where? Anyway, go ahead.
No, it's a little bit like the get off my lawn kind of thing. You know what I mean? And, part of it is there was this, and New York led the way with this, the Bell Commission. This was put into place when, just as I was getting into residency, they call it the 80-hour work week. So there's an older contingent of doctors who, nobody worked harder than them. They worked 120 hours a week in residency, like literally lived at the hospital, which if you look historically, that goes back to William Halstead, who pioneered the residency concept back at Johns Hopkins. It was like 100 some odd years ago. And what it was is, okay, hey, in exchange for room and board, you're going to just serve there. Now, what they failed to consider is that medicine has changed drastically since then, that there's the people who are in the hospital now are the sickest of the sick. And we're doing so much more from, an outpatient. To give you an example, my mentors, when they would do knee and hip replacements, these patients would be in the hospital for 2 weeks. They'd come in 3-4 days ahead of time, get all kinds of testing. So essentially non-acute patients. When I was in residency, we were doing hips in 3 days, knees in 4 days. And now they're doing them the same day and going home. So the people who are actually in the hospital. So if you said, oh, I am staying every other night, it's like a recipe for disaster because these are the sickest of the sick. So whereas then you would imagine a whole list of people who just didn't have problems that were in the hospital. So that's part of it where there's still this sense of, oh, those guys, they don't work as hard as us. Well, they also wouldn't have like everybody in an ICU essentially. No, I don't abide by it.
Can I stop you? Is the explanation for that in the year 1950, a lot of those people just would have died, whereas now we can keep them alive longer?
Technology is advanced. That there's so many things we can do now that we couldn't do. Before when people had heart attacks in 1950, it was lay them in bed because you need the rest. It was actually the worst thing you could do because then you would get all kinds of side effects like a pulmonary embolus and all these things from just laying around. We've learned so much. Same thing with knees and hips. So knee and hip replacement, it's been a revolution in pain control and anesthesia. And we need to get these people moving quicker. And now you can manage some of this from home. So some of it is that, yes, you're correct, that there's treatments that we just didn't have treatments. The other part, though, is that we've learned how to manage a lot of things as an outpatient. And then what you did was you had an infrastructure that worked the same way. So the medical training infrastructure was, well, it was good back then. We should just keep doing it that way. Then it hit a wall in, I don't know the exact date, but I know when I was in residency training, it was 2003 to 2008. It hit a wall because there was this lawsuit. There was somebody at New York Hospital, one of the hospitals where I trained. I mean, you were in New York for a while. So you on the Upper East Side there at New York Presbyterian.
Okay.
So there was some lawsuit where somebody died and then it was some high profile individual, I think it was called Libby Zion case, something like that, where they found out that one of the trainees had been on call for too long and blah, blah, blah. So New York pioneered this whole thing where they said, no, you can't work more than 80 hours per week, which sounds ludicrous to a lot of people anyway, 80 hours. But way back, they used to train 100 or 120. If you were doing cardiac surgery, you're there every, they used to have a joke. They'd say, I can't remember exactly how it went, but something like, what happens if you're, the days you're not on call, you miss half the good cases or something like that. So it was really a badge of honor, especially surgeons. So if he was a surgeon, I don't know if he was a cardiologist, so he might be thinking from that realm where, oh, they're not going to train as hard as I did. In the same regard, there's a lot of junk. Even in my training, there was a lot of stuff that we did that you didn't need me to do. Like here I was, you're busting your butt and getting all A's and all this kind of stuff this whole time and taking people's bandages, 30 bandages off per day. Like, do you need me to do that? No. I mean, you could have a medical assistant do something like that. So there's a lot that's changed where we have nurse practitioners and physician assistants, whatever, the infrastructure has had to adapt because we can just do more. There's treatments that exist now that didn't. My grandmother died when it was around 1980. So I was 4 or 5 years old. She probably would have lived longer if there was knee and hip replacement, if it was as common, because she had bad arthritis and it kept her laid up in bed. Ultimately, she died of a blood clot in her lung, which I know now, because she probably didn't move around much and she was heavy. And a lot of the medicines she was taking were causing her to retain water and that kind of stuff. So it's just, you have to think of the dynamics in the constantly evolving landscape. But no, I don't abide by what he said, because I look at it as part of my mission to help make sure that the next generation is being taught well. Or we could argue about how it should be done. There's some things that I agree with and don't agree with, but yeah, you've got to pass it along, because if you don't, then someday you're gonna be laying in that bed looking and hoping that they were trained well, So
okay, so I mean that's reassuring to say. So it is, and I realize it's not something you'd be saying in a podcast for public consumption anyway, but that you're, what you're getting to work, getting your hands on and being able to work with, it's like, oh yeah, it's not that your age bracket are saying, geez, the crop of fresh new med students these days is not like when I was coming up.
We have some of the most talented, amazing students. I mean, these are some of the kids who are top in their class, but also wonderful people who want to do the right thing. I'm always impressed with our new trainees. They're wonderful, wonderful people. And again, I take it as a personal obligation to help train them and make sure they're going to be good. So no, I would not worry about that. I would not worry about that as the American medical system. We still have the best medical system in the world, and people come here to learn all the time. So.
Okay, great. So I am going to come back to that more substantive issue, and we will work in folks like the economics, get some more financial stuff.
By the way, you actually did read the bill to find out what was in it. I find that admirable. That's you actually did read the bill. Yeah. So fantastic.
Yes, thank you. So let me ask you let's do a quick fun one just to jog your mind. I asked you beforehand, it's okay for me to bring this up, but I remember when COVID first hit, and there was the shortage of what they call it, PPE. Am I getting the acronym right?
Protective equipment. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in particular, the masks. And at first, the government said don't wear them. And then okay. Put all that aside. I'm not making this political, folks. I just want to explain how the zeal of certain organizations to quash, quote, misinformation or whatever actually was counterproductive. And what happened was, I'll tell my quick version of what I remember, then you can fill in the details or correct me if I botch something. But I remember, Matt, that on Facebook, I saw you blasting out saying things that it just sounded odd, like you were writing in code or something. And then you somehow told me behind the scenes that, oh yeah, because I have a bunch of medical grade masks that I guess weren't N95 or something, but they were K9, whatever. You can fill it.
I think they were China or something.
Yeah, and you were trying to let people know that, hey, I have them. I'm willing to give them to you. Like if you're a hospital or whatever, medical retirement, what do you call that? Nursing home or what? And I have a bunch of masks sitting in boxes that I'm happy to give to you for free. Yeah. And Facebook was censoring your post, not allowing you to tell people that because it was worried you were spreading disinformation. And so you had to use code to give masks to people while everybody was freaking out about how we need to get more masks.
Yeah, it was kind of a joke. The code thing was kind of a joke. But yeah, there was a period, just like you said, where the mention of wearing the mask was actually taboo. And then it flipped the other direction, where if you weren't wearing a mask, you were, the devil. So it was the spiral. It was so crazy because there were some of us who were a little ahead of the game. I mean, I would say that we just heard things, saw how things were developing and saying, well, there's no problem with wearing a mask. It's precaution. You're taking precaution. And we know there's some shortages, but we've found some suppliers that have them. And if you need them, talk to us but you're right. At that point, they were censoring us saying that, which was just.
Yeah, I mean, it was where I was hearing reports, because I remember now why I stepped into it. It wasn't just that it intrigued me or appealed to my sense of the absurd, but because I knew through my wife, and she had some contacts from the nursing community that, in Massachusetts, where we knew there were like healthcare, nurses and whatnot going into hospitals and putting on like wearing the same mask 5 days in a row, or just making up, like making their own mask using other material and using it to gear. And I was trying to put the groups into contact with you, and I don't know that it ever even happened.
No, I mean, and what's funny was that the purchasing departments for these hospitals were so leery also of, well, it may not be the perfect one. It's like, you guys have nothing right now. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's the perfect one. You're telling them to reuse the masks and things. And then there were people in New York, everybody saw the videos of people using garbage bags and all this other stuff as personal protective. So yeah, there was definitely a period of absurdity, which then morphed into different types of absurdity and other types of absurdity and ad infinitum. So I think we can all agree that we're glad that's behind us. But I often do worry, did we actually ever learn anything from it and what would happen in the future? Because there was just mass confusion, absolute mass confusion. And it became almost religious. And to this day, I think nobody has a consensus on what was the right thing to do, So anyway.
Okay, I was reviewing some of the topics you had mentioned. What about this 3D printing now in your field? That's becoming more of a thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So this is a fun story. So sometime when I was working in Ohio, a colleague, we were kind of interested in some tech topics, and how they impact orthopedic surgery specifically. So there was sort of a trade journal called Orthopaedics Today that I don't remember if we approached them or they approached us. I can't even remember. I think we approached them and said, hey, well, do you mind if we write a little tech column for you guys? We'll review apps, because it was just kind of becoming a big thing, like an app for this and an app for that. And how are we using them in orthopedics? So every month we would kind of switch on and off and review an app or review something. And one month we did a column on 3D printing in orthopedics. And it turned out a couple years after that, somebody, and I wasn't an expert in 3D printing. Now I'm somewhat more than less than an expert, I guess, in 3D printing. But I wrote a column, and then they approached me. One of these publishing companies approached me and said, hey, we want to write a book on 3D printing. We'd like you to edit it. Now, the catch is there, when you edit a book, you don't have to write everything, which is great, because I'm not an expert in all of it. But I wrote a few chapters, and then my job was to corral all the other authors from around the country who may be experts in one little niche. So someone might be an expert in 3D printing for bone tumors or something like that. It's a pretty cool field, because there's been this whole, and then I've lectured on it at the medical school, and my kids now have a 3D printer and that kind of stuff. So I've done some cases with implants that are 3D printed, which is really cool. But it's this confluence of timing and technology that over time the technology's gotten cheaper and better, and it really has freed up the creativity of these people who maybe didn't have access to a factory and can now create these things in their basement. Now, from a medical standpoint, it's not that easy. You can't just go create an implant in your basement. It's still regulated by the FDA. But there's lots of different applications. There are, let's say, it's like clothing. Okay, so you go to the store, most clothes you can buy off the shelf, but occasionally, maybe certain things don't fit exactly right. Like me in particular, my arms are a little long for button-down shirts off the shelf. So it helps if I have a tailored shirt sometimes. So it's a little like that, where say 95% or more of the stuff we use in the operating room will fit most people because they've built in enough sizes. But then occasionally, like I'll do a case sometimes where it's someone who might have a lot of bone loss in the socket of their shoulder. Maybe they've had either just a really bad disease, or they've had an infection or something where they've had multiple surgeries and the bone gets worn away. And so you have to recreate that, which is really hard to do sometimes with just bone itself, because you have to get bone from somewhere. And in this case, what we're doing more and more now is making some of these 3D printed implants to make up for bone shapes. Tumor is a big one, because that's more common, where a tumor could just take up a weird space and you have to just remove a bunch of it. And then you want to go back and reconstruct so somebody can walk again or lift again or something like that. So it's pretty fascinating stuff with implants. One of the really cool areas is that's going to be kind of way, digging into for a long, long time is 3D printing of biologics. So essentially recreating organs, because you can do things that, how do you make a kidney? You got to layer things in a very complex way.
Right.
So it's not just, throw a bunch of cells in the dish. You actually have to have the three-dimensional form of it matters to the function. So anyway, so that's how I got involved, and I got to be a pseudo expert. There's a couple of books sitting on my shelf, and it's been published in Spanish too. So, but anyways.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so so what you have done, or what you edited the book collection about, was things like, were they still like putting in an implant in somebody's shoulder or whatever because you had taken bone from elsewhere from that person, but there wasn't quite enough. And then this was just augmenting it, but it wasn't itself biological.
Okay, so the historical solution would be, let's say I have this big defect. Okay, we had to cut away some bone, or for some reason the bone got eroded away, and you want to rebuild, in this case, let's say a shoulder, to as close to the anatomy as you could. The historical way of doing it would be, all right, we're going to put a bone graft in, but you have to take that bone from somewhere. You either have to take it from somewhere else in your body where it's a donor site, which might be a problem because you might not be able to get enough, or from a cadaver or something like that. And there are some defects that are just so big that it's really hard to reconstruct. And the cadaver bone doesn't do as well because it just, sometimes it dissolves over time. So the 3D printing is allowed, think of it like film. We grew up in Rochester with Kodak. So it's like a negative. You can take a CT scan and you can essentially look and say, well, this is what the anatomy should look like. It should be built out to about here. Create a 3D negative of it, and then build that out in a factory. And then that implant you can bring to the operating room and match your anatomy correctly. So can it be a combination with the bone? Yeah. But this is really trying to match odd shapes and things or missing pieces. Yeah. At least in orthopedics, that's how we do it. There's other areas that are using this, and it's hours long discussion.
So right now with how it's used in orthopedics, though, the thing that you're inserting, the 3D printed thing, that's not organic, right? Like that's plastic or something like that?
Correct. Although in the future, they're talking about, creating bone grafts and creating other tissues that are organic. But you're right. It's made of metal typically.
Metal? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But so, I have heard people throw away, throw off lines that, in the future, they're going to just 3D print a new lung for you or something. So that is coming?
Yeah, no. These are being worked on in the laboratory right now. Yeah. That's what's fascinating about it. Yeah.
I don't want to put you in a spot, but can you give an idea? At some point, is this going to be real simple and just you go in and it scans you and then, let's give you a new heart and they just plop it in?
It's never that simple just because it's not just structural. So you're dealing with all kinds of other issues with immune matching and that kind of thing. Although that would actually make it easier because you don't, from a donor, you have to worry about matching up immunotypes and things like that. Certainly it would be wonderful if we got to that point. I don't know. At some point, how long it will take to overcome all these various challenges because you have to get the tissues to actually work like real tissues. Maybe in the future. Right now, we're working on ones that are more just structural that can work, without the organs. Each organ is extraordinarily complex. Like the lungs, their main function is to obviously pull air out of the sky and then transport oxygen through your body, and it's part mechanical, it's part physiology, it's part fluid mechanics. There's so much to each, like a heart. It's a muscle, and it has to not only mechanically pump, but then the cells have to be oriented in the correct direction. So, that's obviously the dream is to do that because it really eliminates the need for some of these things like donor programs. Right now there's and that's like a whole interesting economic topic in and of itself, like donor programs, but it would eliminate some of that issue with rejection and that kind of thing. And essentially you could almost make the supply, I don't want to say infinite, it's not infinite. You'd still need capital to do it. It would alleviate a lot of, the issues. So.
Okay. I'm sure most people got this, but just to fill in and you were alluding to the fact that right now, one issue is even if somebody gives you some donor gives a perfectly healthy kidney or something, your body might reject it because in general, foreign things getting put in your body's like, whoa, what is this? We gotta,
and for good reason, because there's foreign things that get introduced all the time, and that's why you have an immune system to recognize self versus not self. Because if you didn't, you'd get eaten up by viruses and bacteria all the time. Yeah,
right. I know when women get pregnant, that's a thing that the immune system has to be told,
yes,
hey, don't kill this thing, even though it's not the mom per se.
Yeah.
Now, is it true? I saw a TV show a long time ago where a guy got an organ transplant from someone who it turned out had been a serial killer, and then that made that guy a serial killer. Like his hand was killed. That doesn't really happen, right?
I haven't heard of any of those cases yet. I would, if one comes up, I'll let you know.
All right. I just want to make sure. I don't want to give any misinformation out on the podcast. This is probably going to get dinged on YouTube anyway because we mentioned COVID. Okay, let's now, in the time we have remaining here.
You'll have the algorithm will pick up your podcast, then things you might like. And then all of a sudden these serial killer shows, you're like, well, how come Bob Murphy and then a serial killer, what happened? It's like one word, Okay.
How do you feel? Do you have any remarks on just in terms of like the economics or the finance of, higher medicine in the United States? Because like the cliche you mentioned earlier, hey, it's the greatest system in the world.
Yeah, it's a mess. That's in a nutshell, it's a mess. What's interesting is you made me think real quick, because when you talked about the Affordable Care Act, we're now seeing all these different repercussions of it. And one of them that was put in the Affordable Care Act is that doctors cannot own hospitals. But interestingly enough, private equity can own hospitals. So the guy who is running a hedge fund is probably, well, what the government is saying is that the guy who's running a hedge fund or a private equity firm is more trustworthy with your healthcare dollars than your physician, because physicians are banned from it, which is interesting because there have been so many studies that show that physician-owned hospitals actually tend to have better quality, lower cost, et cetera, you name it. But that's been a provision. And I know a friend of mine who works in the brokerage space. He's not a doctor, but he brokers for companies, find how to find insurance or how to find solutions that are actually not insurance, that are just direct contracting with doctors. But he talks about this all the time online. He talks about how, yeah, okay, you won't allow doctors to own hospitals, but you allow private equity to do so, where they come in and strip mine them. Like one of the examples was in Hahnemann Hospital, which is in Philadelphia. It got shut down. And immediately when we shut it down, they lost a whole bunch of training programs, inner city hospital. They immediately moved the clinical side into one company and the real estate into another. And then essentially, decided, okay, well, this is the profitable part, and then we're going to rebuild it as something else. Like, is that good for the community? I don't know. I mean, I know most of the doctors I work with are pretty darn good people and care about the people they work with and the communities that they serve. And I'd probably trust them, a little more on what to do. Think about this too. The best hospital systems in the world, in the country, I would argue, if you think of Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, they're doctor run. Now they're not, I don't know if the hospitals technically are owned by them, but they're run by doctors. So it tells you something. There's something about the institutional knowledge, the deep knowledge of what is real value and what is not real value. Here's another example. You asked about this, like medical economics. Medicine works on what's called the RVU system. And I don't know it well enough. I want to say 1984 or 1989, sometime in the 80s, where they came up with this system where it's committees that decide on what the value is of something. And it's sort of the labor theory of value as opposed to a subjective theory of value. I don't know exactly how you call it, but the labor theory of value would say, well, the more labor you put in, the more valuable something would be. And I sometimes tell my trainees this, is like, well, if I work 10 hours on digging a hole and then filling it back in, I did a lot of work. Yeah, was that of any value at all? No. But essentially they do that in medicine, where Medicare, the CMS system, they get committees together and they say, all right, well, every year they have a list of procedures, like, well, all right, that one's worth X number of RVUs and that one's worth X number. And then it creates this weird sense of, if they haven't revised it enough, and if a procedure becomes less valuable over time, which it can be, but it's still stuck in the old payment model, then you get a sort of a mismatch of what a doctor might be incentivized to do because of the pay versus what they should be doing. Here's a good example. Knee arthroscopy. So a knee arthroscopy, I'll take a pencil. Oh, here's my little Apple pencil or whatever. So knee scope is an operation done with an instrument about this size. So you make little incisions like this. You put a fiber optic camera in and instruments like these in the knee. What they found over time, they used to think that if you put a scope in a knee and shave out some of the arthritic stuff, the cartilage, smooth everything out, that would work well. Over time, it took randomized studies to figure out that actually, no, it didn't do anything. If your knee's arthritic, don't just smooth it out. You either need to just do physical therapy, get injections, or get a knee replacement. But that scope procedure does nothing. Well, guess what? If this procedure is still paying a certain amount because the RVUs are still set by a committee at X amount, then it may create this perverse incentive for people to do, these procedures when they shouldn't. So I'm not saying that doctors do that. Maybe there are ones out there who do. I don't know. And to be honest with you, sometimes patients actually aren't always their best advocates because they want to It's hard. I can come up with a million examples of this. One of them is like MRIs. They say, oh, I want an MRI. Well, you don't really need an MRI for XYZ, and you can spend a long time explaining that to somebody, but they think it's seeing everything perfectly, but it also introduces all these other issues, but because their insurance pays for it or whatever they want it.
Right,
So
right.
It's not just the doctor side. There's also the patient side, where what would work best really is if you had almost some middle tier of, call them neutral patient advocates, or almost like Consumer Reports, who is then translating all this medical literature to say, look, this is what you should be concerned about. This is what you should, almost like, I don't want to call it concierge, but someone who's a mediator to help you, guide you through, well, okay, what do you, and that's what the doctor should be doing, which they usually do. I mean, in spite of sometimes the perverse incentives. But anyway, yeah, I don't want to say that all things are like that, because they're not. But there's some procedures that should probably get paid way more. I'll give you an example. Hip replacement's one of them. Hip replacement has been shown to be like life-changing. That and cardiac bypass. But you wouldn't believe how the prices have gone down, down, down. And then there's other procedures that don't produce the same level of value, that then get stuck in this RVU model. And then they just, there needs to be some level where it floats a little better. So anyways.
Yeah, do you know what RVU stands for? Is it a value unit?
Value units, which again, it gets to the fact of, they call it, well, the more work that goes into it, the more valuable it is. The reality is, it's just the committee decides on it. Because
I was going to say, that almost sounds like literally like central planning, like in a Soviet
but it's
Union.
And if you really think about it, there are procedures. I'll give you an example. Like, if somebody gets an infection in a joint replacement, it's very laborious. Sometimes you have to take the implant out, put a new one back in. The procedure may take 3 times as long as just doing a primary surgery. Now, that's one where the RVU system fails, because the committee doesn't proportionally pay you 3 times as much or even twice as much. They might only pay you 20% more. So what it creates is a shortage of people who want to do those types of procedures. It's sort of this perverse, weird situation where I would find sometimes the senior surgeons, they don't want to do the harder cases because they're proportionally not getting paid as much. So the system needs to realign better that way. I still always try and stay agnostic on it and just focus on doing the right thing. But maybe that just comes from like our background of, we were taught that way. Focus on that, and the other stuff takes care of itself. But it creates some weird incentives sometimes,
Is that, and then once you brought it up, I kind of remember that, I had heard people mention the Affordable Care Act did not allow for doctor-owned hospital. Is the ostensible reason for that just what you're getting at there, that, we want the doctor to pick what's like in the medical interest of the patient, not be worried about dollars and cents? Is that where that's coming from?
Ask me. If you want the cynical answer, which I think,
I do want the cynical answer. Well, what do you think the right answer is? I guess
the hospital lobby is enormous.
Okay.
Way more political clout than doctors do. And they probably helped put that in there. The ostensible reason would be, hey, doctors might be incentivized for money as opposed to doing the right thing. The reality has been shown to be different. There are doctor-owned hospitals. It's just that they didn't allow any new ones after a certain time. And if you look at them objectively in the research, the quality tends to be better. The cost is less. It's a little like, the grocery store owner runs his own shop. He's got to take care of his customers, because if he doesn't,
right, you wouldn't say, you can't let Bobby Flay run his own restaurant, otherwise the quality would sink.
Right. You wouldn't have the Millionaire you can't own his own, his own office, or you name it. Exactly. So the whole point is, if you poison your customers, they're not coming back. You know what I mean?
Right.
So no, that's what I think is going on.
So one thing I think on this podcast, or at least its predecessor version, and certainly on my personal one, I've had Keith Smith on a lot. So he's a founder of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma.
Yeah, no, he's wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
And by the way, you were right. Yes, economists would say, as opposed to the cost or labor theory, it's the modern subjective theory of value. So yes, kudos to you.
I'm getting a little bit. All right, good.
So one of the things, the points he makes, and this is what I put in the book that I co-authored on this stuff, is like, just to get your head wrapped around, not you, but like to get their head wrapped around how crazy this is just most hospitals, like, they don't have their prices posted. So like, if you had an elective procedure and you wanted to shop around,
right,
they won't even tell you how much it's going to be. It's like the analogy I used in the book was to say, imagine if that's how the car market worked.
Right.
And you had to go buy a new car, and only after you signed the papers and it was yours would the dealership tell you how much it cost.
Right.
And in that crazy world, don't you think car prices would probably go up a lot?
Well, and unfortunately, it hurts the people who actually do want to pay cash. We come across this a little bit. Occasionally, we'll have some people come across the border from Canada who will pay cash, but it hurts those people because it's this weird system where the insurance company essentially owns the patient. And I'm putting it that way, I may be overstating it, but the reality is that insurance companies tend to be regional monopolies. And what they'll do is they'll say, all right, if you're in our network, you can treat our patients, but then you get the network discount, so then we'll pay, here's the regular rate, but then we'll pay this amount. So then because you can't charge different people different rates, what happens is the hospital or the doctor's office technically has to charge whatever the highest paying insurance would be, and that's their cash price. But meanwhile, they'll accept a much bigger discount from a particular insurance company. It may be as much as 80% discount in order to capture their, like, hey, we insure 100,000 people in this region. In order to capture that, they'll then take this steep discount, but then they'll end up charging the cash people, these ungodly numbers. So it just creates this crazy system, which is like, it's nuts. It's definitely nuts. And we're just we just are trying to figure out ways of, again, the one beautiful thing about medicine is that there still is an ethic, the Hippocratic Oath, like ultimately your mission is to treat people, to figure out that way, however you can. And we've got many different ways of doing it. Like sometimes we'll contract with the hospital. Like for instance, example in New York State, the Medicaid rates are just terrible. I mean, sometimes it's 15% or 20% of Medicare rate, which is not a super high reimbursing insurance. And so you almost say, well, you can't even, keep the lights on for that price. I'll give you an example, like a shoulder arthroscopy procedure. Just take a guess, if just my opinion, forget the rest of it, what I might get paid for that through Medicaid. Do you have a guess what that might reimburse?
What can you just tell me more about, like, what that involves? I'm doing labor theory of value, but
fiber optic camera with instruments into the shoulder. The procedure may take anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour, give or take. I mean, it's certainly setup time and the 90-day window after and taking care of the patient. So there's a lot of technical skill involved. So
$3,000.
Right. So Medicaid rate in New York State might pay you $200 for just a simple shoulder arthroscopy. So you look at that, and then there are certain doctors who just say, well, we're not taking those patients. And they say, oh, we got a whole bunch more people insured, but then more and more doctors' offices saying, well, we can't afford that because I got to pay my secretary and I got to, keep the lights on and pay the rent and pay malpractice insurance and blah, blah, blah. You name it. I mean, malpractice insurance, last time I checked in New York City, ran in around $150,000 per year, $100,000 per, something crazy, Thankfully, we're in upstate Western New York, which is a little less, but still, we're just making the money to pay that before you even turn any profit. You can see how people then, so what we have to do in some cases is then we contract with the hospital. For whatever reason, the hospital gets paid better to treat those patients so there will be a facility fee and then there's our fee. So I don't get a facility fee. I just get, okay, here's your chunk for doing whatever labor you did. Then they get paid for equipment, blah, blah, blah. They somehow proportionally get paid better as a hospital. So what sometimes we'll just do is, okay, fine, we'll come up with a rate that is reasonable for us, but we'll treat the patients. They'll be your patients at the hospital, So there's all kinds of arrangements. So I guess what I'm saying is there's tons of workarounds in the system. And we continue as doctors to just try to continue to treat people, and that's our mission, obviously, is to do it. It's part of the ethic of what we're doing. I'm going to bring this up because I haven't talked about this much. I had this idea that I haven't really formalized too much, where I called it the 10% solution. So we always get this thrown out, the Obamacare got thrown out like, hey, there's a certain percentage of people who are uninsured, and you can argue what that number is at any one time. We would float between 15 million to 30 million, but let's just call it 10%. Some people are changing jobs and some people are this or that, which is a whole other topic too, by the way, because Your audience probably knows this. In World War II, they made healthcare benefits a pre-tax benefit. You don't have that with your auto insurance, your homeowners insurance, et cetera. And it created another perverse incentive to where if it wasn't pre-tax, you wouldn't have to get it through your job. They did that because they put wage freezes, and the companies went to the government and say, hey, look, we're trying to recruit people, but we have no way of incentivizing them to come. So, okay, well, we'll make it a pretext, but it's now then state. So anyway, I almost lost my train of thought there. I'm trying to
10% solution.
10%. So this idea of the 10% solution, if you simply said, all right, look, this is more of a distributive way of taking care of charity care, because that's one of the knocks, and that's why a lot of doctors convince people to do the affordable care. Oh, well, hey, all the uninsured. What if we re-owned the uninsured? Because years ago, that's what doctors used to do. In some ways, taking on the charity care was what made the profession. That you decided, we're going to take care of the people who can pay, but we're also going to take care of the people who can't. And we know at any one time that may only be 10%. Now, granted, there'll be some geographic issues because, one neighborhood, you go to Beverly Hills and sure, everybody's going to, but you could do this in a different way. You could tie this instead to the government. You could tie it to I'm board certified by the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery. You could make it, instead of just passing an intellectual test, which I have to do every so often, I have to every 10 years, I have to, redo my board certification. Instead of just making it an intellectual thing like, oh, do you know the material? You make it an ethical thing where, hey, you're not board certified unless you proved that you did X amount of charity care. And if you work in Beverly Hills, well, hey, maybe you got to go on a medical mission for a little bit somewhere to serve. And then you would own the charity problem, at least from a doctor perspective. Let the hospitals do it their own way. And we could then take care of that. Now, what happens is it becomes a race to the bottom. Some guy down the street says, well, I'm doing all the charity care and those guys aren't, they're getting rich and I'm not. But if you made it where the governing body, the certifying body, which is a professional body, encourage that, it might change things. I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever see it, but anyway, that's just my crazy idea. So,
okay, well, I think we're out of time, and I got to wrap it up there, ending with your crazy idea and starting with your good idea.
We started with my Josh Allen crazy idea. We ended with the other crazy idea. I'm sorry if I talked.
What you should do is just get like an 8-foot cutout of an orthopedic surgeon and just sending uninsured people to that guy, and then there you go.
We'd have some. That'd be a whole other.
Okay. Well, folks,
next one.
Yeah. My guest, folks, has been Matt DiPaola, who did this episode in the hour of his time purely out of charity. We paid him nothing for it. So thank you, Matt, for your time and your insights.
No, thank you, Bob. It's been a lot of fun. My pleasure.
Yeah, it was good catching up a little bit here. And thank you, folks, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
This concludes another episode of InFi, The Future of Finance, with Dr. Robert Murphy. The information provided is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with qualified professionals before making any financial or investment decisions. For more information on the host and for previous episodes, visit InFi, thefutureoffinance.io. Thanks for listening.